What is up, everyone? It is Quinn here, back with another video. And yesterday I went through my top 12 running backs kind of post free agency, or at least, post most of the major signings. Today's video, same style, but I'm going to be going through my top 12 wide receivers, and I'm also going to be splitting them up into tiers. So I believe I have 5 different tiers for these top 12 wide receivers. As always, this is very early on in the offseason, so these are still going to change. These are obviously not set in stone. So I do want to hear your guys' opinions. Do you think certain guys are too high, too low? Did I snub a player from the top 12? Just let me know down below in the comment section, and I'll make sure to get back to every single person. But let's just jump right into it here, starting off with my tier 1 player. At number 1, I have Justin Jefferson. It seems very likely he's going to be the consensus wide receiver 1, heading into this season. He was targeted 184 times, caught 128 of those for over 1,800 yards, and then scored 9 touchdowns. Just a dominant overall season. Number 1 in targets, number 1 in receptions, receiving yards, and yards after the catch. So just a crazy, crazy impressive 2022 season out of Justin Jefferson. He was the wide receiver 1 in total points. He was the wide receiver 2 in points per game, just behind Kupp, who, didn't really play a full season. I think it was like 9 games. And the dude is only 24 years old, so it's possible he hasn't even hit his peak. He could still be getting better. I mean, he could replicate this season next year and score 13, 14 touchdowns instead of the 9 he scored last year. So for me, he's locked in at wide receiver 1, and there's really not another player that I would even consider taking over Justin Jefferson at the wide receiver position. Now moving into tier 2, going to start it off here with Jamar Chase. Looking at 2022, we actually saw Cooper Kupp, Tyreek Hill, and Devontae Adams. All of those dudes averaged more points per game than Jamar Chase, but Chase was right up there at wide receiver 5 in points per game. And the difference here for Chase is he just doesn't really have a risk of falling off. And maybe falling off is the wrong term. Like, I don't think a guy like Cooper Kupp or Tyreek Hill, these guys aren't just going to fall off a cliff and go from high-end wide receiver 1s to wide receiver 2s, but maybe at their age, they take a slight dip. For Jamar Chase, it just seems very, very unlikely that he takes that dip. He's probably not even at his prime yet, or maybe not even close to his prime, and I wouldn't be shocked if him and Burrow go out there, just completely ball out here in 2023, and Jamar Chase could, finish as the wide receiver 1. I would not be surprised with that at all. So just the age factor, the fact that I think he is still, going up, that's why I have Jamar Chase here at number 2. But in the same tier 2, at number 3 overall, I have Cooper Kupp. He's been the wide receiver 1 in points per game over the past 2 seasons, and it is possible that he repeats that again here in 2023. He just has, a few red flags that I think we do have to point out here. He will be 30 heading into the season, so he's, not really ascending anymore. He's also coming off of a season-ending ankle injury, which is why he only played 9 games, I think I said earlier. And then we also just don't know what's going on at the quarterback position. We've heard reports that Stafford's ready to go, good to go, but then we've also, heard some things. Maybe he's retiring. Once you're starting to deal with concussions, neck stuff, nerve stuff, never great really at any position for football. So some red flags there, but if Cooper Kupp is on the field, he's going to be producing, and I still think, he is a top 3 fantasy wide receiver heading into 2023. Now my final tier 2 player, my wide receiver 4 overall, it's going to be Tyreek Hill, and he really showed zero signs of slowing down after getting traded to the Dolphins. Him and Mike McDaniel proved to just be a fantastic combination. Tyreek Hill just crazy impressive all across the board. 3rd in targets, 2nd in target share, 1st in target rate, 2nd in air yards, number 1 in deep targets, number 2 in receptions, number 1 in yards per route run. So across the board, just a fantastic season. That culminated in him finishing as the wide receiver 3 in fantasy points per game. As long as Tua's, good to go with the concussions heading into 2023, I really don't see why Tyreek Hill isn't going to be able to replicate what he did in 2022. Now moving over to tier 3, I've got 2 guys here in tier 3. The first one is going to be Stephon Diggs, who I just think at this point in his career is a locked in, very strong, well-rounded, mid-tier wide receiver 1 who does have that high-end upside. We know he's going to be the clear-cut alpha wide receiver for Josh Allen. Obviously, a Josh Allen-led offense is going to put up points. There's going to be enough volume to support Stephon Diggs, and in his 3 seasons with the Bills, he has finished as the wide receiver 3, the wide receiver 9, and the wide receiver 6 in points per game. So very consistent, somewhere between a high-end wide receiver one to like a mid to back-end wide receiver one. I don't really see why that would change here in 2023. And then the second player and final player in tier 3 is going to be Davante Adams, who's my wide receiver 6 overall. And he's actually the first player I've talked about here who's actually had a shakeup from free agency. The wide receivers, the running backs I talked about yesterday, they had a few things going on here and there. A lot of these wide receiver rankings didn't switch up a ton, but for Davante Adams, we have Derek Carr out. Jimmy Garoppolo is in. In terms of quarterback play, I would probably say this is like a slight downgrade at the position, but I still think Jimmy G is more than capable enough to, support Davante Adams. He's probably just going to be force-feeding the dude, if we're being honest. We have seen Davante Adams lead all wide receivers in touchdowns in 2 of the last 3 seasons, so that has been a big factor in his production, and I guess we'll just have to wait and see if he's able to find that same success here on this current Raiders offense. I don't think the offense is going to be terrible, but is this going to be an elite unit putting up, a crazy number of points? Personally, I don't think so, but I mean, they weren't really that last year, and Davante Adams was still fantastic in the touchdown department. So you still got to like Davante Adams as a very strong wide receiver one. Hasn't really shown any signs of falling off, and he should, be very strong once again in 2023. Now, moving into tier 4 at number 7 overall, I have CeeDee Lamb, and we saw CeeDee Lamb finally take that big jump in his 3rd NFL season. He was the wide receiver 8 in points per game, and I honestly think what was so impressive about this season was that it's not like all these factors came together and kind of created a perfect storm for CeeDee Lamb to ball out. This was kind of, an up and down season for the Cowboys. Dak Prescott missed time early. He came back. He wasn't all that great. He was struggling a little bit. It's not like this offense was passing the ball 40-something times a game. They were not a pass funnel offense. So Lamb had all that stuff going on around him and was still able to deliver a mid-tier wide receiver 1 season. And so I actually do think there's a decent amount of room for improvement. And I think he could potentially take that leap into the Davante Adams, Stephon Diggs tier of players. And if he can take that leap, he's probably going to be in that range, for the foreseeable future. Now, sticking in tier 4, at wide receiver 8, I have A.J. Brown. I think at this point, looking at A.J. Brown, I think he's a nice mid-tier wide receiver 1. I really don't see him as a guy who's going to fall out of the top 12 over this next season, but I also don't know if he has that potential to really kind of crack into the top 3. I think CeeDee Lamb could do that. Not sure if A.J. Brown's going to be able to do that, but I do have to admit, the fit with the Eagles was much better than I was expecting. I didn't really like the move for him. It turned out very, very well. He went for 1,496 receiving yards and 11 touchdowns. He's never going to be a guy who's going to be a top 5 targeted wide receiver. That's just not his game, but he's going to make up for it with big plays, touchdown upside, efficiency. A.J. Brown was 2nd in yards per out run, 4th in yards per target, and 5th in yards per reception. So someone who I just think is very firmly here as a mid-tier wide receiver 1. And then my final player in tier 4 is going to be Amon-Ra St. Brown. And I actually think when we look at Amon-Ra's fantasy numbers from 2022, I actually think they're a little bit deflated, actually, due to some poorly timed injuries. Every year we have a few dudes who deal with injuries where it's they get hurt in the first quarter, they get knocked out of the game, and it happens 2-3 times, and it kind of hurts their production, right? Because they're basically giving you 2 duds. Even though, in the grand scheme of things, it's not that's something that's predictive. It's not going to happen consistently. So even with these, weird timed injuries, he was still the wide receiver 10, averaging 13.4 points per game, which is impressive. But if you actually remove the 2 games where he played less than 35% of the snaps due to those early injuries, he actually would have averaged the same number of points per game as A.J. Brown. So just kind of putting that into context there. I do think this Lions wide receiver room is going to be better heading into 2023. Jameson Williams, hopefully, if you're a JMO fan, will really start to break out. Came back later on in the season from the ACL, but clearly, wasn't 100%. He'll likely be much more involved heading into 2023, but I still think Amon-Ra is the stud wide receiver in this offense. I still think he is going to be the guy in this wide receiver room, and I do like him as a top 10 wide receiver. Now, moving into tier 5, this is a guy who did not crack my top 12 when I did them, a few weeks ago, but he is now here at wide receiver 10. It is going to be Garrett Wilson, and obviously this is assuming that Aaron Rodgers will be joining the Jets. Not official at the time that I'm recording this, but, it seems kind of inevitable there. Garrett Wilson put together an overall great rookie season with pretty tough quarterback play, between Zach Wilson and Mike White. He was only the wide receiver 31 in half point PPR points per game, which definitely doesn't sound great, but a lot of that was just due to the lack of touchdowns. Wilson had 4 receiving touchdowns in 17 games, which is obviously a very, very tough number, but it's going to be pretty tough to excel in that area when your team has the second fewest passing touchdowns in the NFL. So you can't really blame him there. As a rookie in 17 games, he saw 147 targets, caught 83 of those for 1,103 receiving yards. Now you bring in Aaron Rodgers, who I still think has some juice as a quarterback. I think we could see Garrett Wilson take a massive jump heading into year 2, and I think he could be a guy who operates as a top 10 fantasy wide receiver. Next up at wide receiver 11, this is where I have Jalen Waddle. We saw a great sophomore season out of Waddle, was the wide receiver 13 in points per game. He became wildly efficient, playing behind Tyreek Hill in that Mike McDaniel offense. If you remember his rookie season, his usage was really weird. He was used as like a super heavy volume guy, very, very inefficient. He turns that super inefficient high volume season in 2021 into a crazy efficient season in 2022, where he actually leads all wide receivers in yards per reception and yards per target. Like I said, the complete opposite of his rookie season. He's obviously still getting better as a player in this offense, with Mike McDaniel, Tyreek Hill, Tua. I think he's going to have a very solid season, and he's actually a guy who kind of struggled in those games where Tua was out. In the games where Tua was active, his production was even better. So I do think he could be a guy who breaks into the top 10. Does he have that elite upside if Tyreek Hill's healthy? Probably not, but I still think he's someone who's totally worthy of being a fantasy wide receiver 1. And then the wide receiver 12 here, sticking around in tier 5, I have T. Higgins. I think, some people may argue this spot for a few different players. For me, I feel pretty confident having T. Higgins here. Just like Amon-Ra, Higgins was a guy who dealt with some weird injury stuff. I know if you had him on your team, it was probably very frustrating because I think it was week 1, he left early on with a concussion, and then he had 2 other games where he was active. Like he suited up, he's on the sideline, you get your little fantasy blurb, telling you he's good to go, you throw him in your lineup, and then you tune into the game and he's just standing there on the sideline playing 1 or 2 snaps over the entire game. I'm pretty sure that happened twice last season. So if you take out those 3 weird injury games, he was the wide receiver 9 in points per game with a very impressive season. There were some rumblings, maybe the Bengals move him, trade him. It doesn't seem like they're very interested in doing that. Obviously, basically his best spot is to just stick around here with the Bengals. So with how talented T. Higgins has proven he is, I feel solid having Joe Burrow's wide receiver 2 here as a fringe top 12 option for fantasy. So that is my top 12. Like I said at the top, let me know what you guys think. Who should be higher? Who should be lower? Thoughts on the tiers? Who got snubbed? All of that stuff. If you enjoyed, you stuck around all the way till the end, do me a huge favor, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. But thank you all for stopping by, and I will see you in the next one.